Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Happy second Sexy Friday just for this month. And we have a special guest today. So I'm just going to wait for Lyndsey and Mysti.
Hi, happy first or second second Friday. It's so confusing. There's Mysti too. Yay, it worked. First try.
Hello,
Oh,
hello.
we have had tons of technological issues, Mysti. So the fact that this worked the first time is like amazing.
Oh my gosh. Okay, good. Now I just have to get my
You get
camera holder.
get set up. We started a couple minutes early.
Mhm.
And hi to
Oh,
everybody who's here. I think people are excited to talk about AIDS because we have lots of people joining right away.
okay, good.
Um, well, we can get started if you guys are ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, well, we'll start with our standard introduction. So, we'll introduce ourselves and then Mysti will let you introduce yourself. So, people know us by now, but we always, just in case there's new faces. I'm Dr. Sam E. Greenberg. I always forget to put the doctor. I'm a sexuality researcher and a Enneagram coach focusing on sexuality and relationships with my clients. I'm also a writer and a researcher by training. And I'm so excited to welcome Mysti this month. Lyndsey, why don't you introduce yourself and then Mysti, introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lyndsey Fraser. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified sex therapist and an IA accredited professional. I have a private practice, notice I didn't say small this time, in South Minneapolis, where I specialize in relationships and sexuality utilizing the Enneagram. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Mysti, since you're new?
All right. So I'm Mysti Rainwater. I am a licensed professional counselor in both Arizona and Montana. And I have a large group practice, actually I run a mental health counseling facility. And I have been using personality in my work forever, for as long as I've been doing counseling, which is like 30 years at this point. I can't even believe I'm saying that. But about 15 years ago, I was reintroduced to the Enneagram after having chosen Myers-Briggs over it because it was more research oriented and data-based. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I haven't been using this in my counseling practice the entire time. And so started using it with my clients and then started training my clinicians in my group practice to use the Enneagram in their sessions as well. I've always specialized personally in marriage counseling and relationships, specifically sex and sexuality. So when I introduced the Enneagram, I decided to become certified. I'm also an IEA accredited professional. And now I kind of merge all of those together. It's been so successful in the psychotherapy setting that I now teach other licensed psychotherapists to use the Enneagram in a clinical setting.
Mysti, can you say your type and subtype also?
So I am a type 8. If we look at wings, I would have so the wings of 9 and 7. And if you look at the top three, I show up as an 8-7-3, or kind of my tri-type, if you will. And then subtype is sexual, most dominant, and self-pres second, with a
Perfect.
social blind.
That's going to be important because we want to ask you about your personal experiences as well as your clinical experience today as we talk about AIDS. So, Lyndsey, do you want to introduce or reintroduce our series that we're doing? Then we'll dive into AIDS.
Yes. So as many of you know, we started our series on the Enneagram type and sexuality last month with type 9, my type. And this month we are doing type 8, and we're going the opposite way around the Enneagram, because oftentimes 9s have to go last, and we're wanting to give opportunities for 9s to go first, and our people that are 8 and 7s to get to go sooner as well. So today is 8s, and next month we're going to talk about our 7s in our series. So welcome to the series. This is episode 2 of the series, and next month will be episode 3.
Perfect. So we're going to start with just an overview of 8s in the research and in clinical practice. So I'll start with 8s in the research. 8s are one of the standout types in the research that have really clear, discernible patterns with sexuality. All 9 types do, all 3 subtypes do, but 8s really especially stand out. And I didn't mention, my doctoral research is on the intersection between Enneagram type and patterns of sexual desire and expression, as well as subtype. So for our 8s, we see 8s score absolutely highest on overall sexual desire, dyadic sexual desire, meaning the desire to behave sexually with a partner, higher than all the other types. Highest on sexually explicit materials use. 9 is second. We talked about that last time. But 8s are first. 8s are the highest participants in BDSM, most likely to have participated in BDSM activities. And 8s say that they can comfortably go the least amount of time without sex compared to all the other 8 types. 8s also have the highest sensitivity to what's called explicit erotic cues, desire cues. And what those are is anything that's a cue for desire. So there's all different types of cues for desire. Explicit erotic cues are ones that are explicitly erotic. So, your partner talking about sex, directly initiating sex, so saying they want to have sex, these really obvious things, where some of our other types are more interested in more subtle cues, as some of these implicit romantic types of cues. 8s are really interested in the explicit erotic cues. So basically 8s prefer straightforward and easy to interpret sexual cues, just as they prefer straightforward communication in everyday life. I think a lot of us could have predicted these things. And then finally, I'll say that 8s have the highest sexual assertiveness. So I talked last month about how I measured that. That's in terms of, I feel comfortable telling my partner what I want. I feel comfortable telling my partner I don't like something. I want to do something different. I want to try XYZ. 8s are comfortable with all of that, and they far and away are the highest scorers on sexual assertiveness. So I'll pause there. I'll talk more about the research in a minute when we get into subtype. But Lyndsey and Mysti, I'd love to hear about 8s in your clinical practice. Lyndsey, why don't you go first? And then Mysti, you can add whatever comes up for you. So tell us a little more about 8s and sexuality.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see is one of the things that you mentioned. The 8s oftentimes in relationship with partners oftentimes are the higher desire partner. Now again, when we talk about desire, I'm going to say the ability to push through context, because one of the things that we're learning is that sometimes these issues are not actually desire issues. They're the ability to move through context. And so 8s are not affected by context that much around sexuality. Maybe your self-preservers a little bit more, but even my self-preservers oftentimes that are 8s don't really struggle with this. They tend to have sexual pleasure pretty easily. Some of the complaints I get from partners is sometimes the way that they touch is really firm and can be overwhelming and too intense. And so a lot of times partners in relationships with 8s, because we know for 8s that sexuality is about being alive, and the way that you be alive is by how the intensity of the sensation and the things that you feel. And so especially when I've had more body sensitive types like your 1s or your 6s in relationship, sometimes this can sort of overwhelm them a little bit more, and not knowing how to give language. And so like how you touch is really important. 8s, this is one of the things. Yes, possessive touch is a very good way of putting that, and that can feel overwhelming for certain types. Even your 9s will feel overwhelmed sometimes with that possessive touch type thing as well. So I think it's just a really interesting perspective, and they are very direct and to the point. There is nothing hidden with an 8. And it can be very frustrating getting to the 8, and some of us like us 9s and us 6s, and some other types that are a little bit more like passive in our communication, they're like, we don't get it. Why can't you just be direct? We just are direct and to the point. And so these are some of the common things that I see in my practice, but I would be curious what Mysti sees in her practice.
So I see much of the same, and I personally experience much of the same. So it's interesting. I think it's valuable too to mention that in my practice, I don't see a statistically high number of 8s in my practice. I do see, like, I see more 8s than 3s for sure, but I notice that when 8s come in, they don't often stay for a very long time. And I think that that's indicative of everything else that we're talking about, that energy that I get from 8s of get in, get the work done, and get out very quickly. I think it's sort of funny that they present in counseling, I think probably similarly to the way they present in the bedroom.
That's so funny
Definitely.
and true. Yeah. Well, we're gonna ask you a bunch more things, Missy, about, especially your personal experience, your personal advice, because we got a lot of questions um, from followers for AIDS. So we'll get to that in a minute. But the first thing I want to do is talk about a couple of key issues about AIDS, all of us. So the first one is the subtype differences, and for each month, for each type, we're going to be talking about the subtype differences as well. So I'll just do a quick note first on the research on this. So of course, Lyndsey and I have done more than one episode on subtype differences, and you can find those and I have a story highlight of our past episodes. Um, Oh, we got the comment that says, I can be in the bedroom for a long time, definitely not in and out. But that also speaks to stamina.
Yeah.
So AIDS tend to have a lot of stamina also for like for sexual play and sexual interaction more than other types as well. So that was a great comment. So speaking about subtypes, we know that the sexual subtype generally, the sexual subtype of every type is reporting higher sexual desire, is reporting higher sensitivity to these explicit erotic cues that I described before, and is reporting a lower tolerance for going without sex. That's across type. So when we get our sexual 8s, they're the highest kind of everything. If we look at all 27 subtypes, sexual 8s tend to be the highest on almost everything I measured. Again, highest sexual explicit materials, highest BDSM, highest desire, etc. Like looking at overall the high subtypes, we do see sexual 8s and social 8s showing up in like the top 5 subtypes for most of these things, and occasionally self-pres 8s show up in the top 5, for example, for desire. But we also know that self-preservation instinct is more difficult time pushing through context, like Lyndsey talks about. And so for our self-pres 8s, we'll get a little bit less intensity. We get our intensity kind of mitigated by the self-preservation instinct. So I'll pause there, and I'd love to hear what you all have to say about 8s and subtype.
I was going to say, so Mysti was a part of this as well, but we've been doing these focus groups with our colleague Frederick. And one of the things that was really interesting to me in particular about some of the assumptions I had around sexual 8s, because I sat in as an assistant for that group, is that sexual 8s are actually a lot softer than I think we anticipate or expect, right? We always think of our 8s as these really intense and sort of go in there and get it done and do all of this. But like one of the things that I was really impressed it with sort of sitting in this is like, they're actually, it's like soft intensity. I don't even know how else to describe it, but it is this soft intensity. And Mysti, I'd be very curious sort of your experience sitting in with other sexual 8s, but that's what I got out of that particular focus group that I thought was interesting.
Yes, thank you. I think that when in response to the comment to you just use this language, I think there's such a variety of language that we can use. So when I was saying sort of the in and out, and then the comment about, I could stay in the bedroom for 12 hours, I was thinking I want to almost switch that language up to let's get to it versus more so. So I think that 8s in the office, in the counseling office, they tend to come in with this idea of like, let's get to it. And then sometimes they will leave because they're interested in getting to the thing that they're doing and then being done with it and moving on with something else. Now, for sexual eights, if the thing that they're doing is having a sexual encounter with a partner, I think that the energy of let's get to it, like let's not beat around the bush. Let's not let's not use this language of for example, using pet language for body parts, things like that. We're just saying, for myself and for sexual aides that I've worked with, we all sort of are like, if you want to have sex with me, let me know you want to have sex with me. If you want, so let's get to it. Now, if we're talking about a sexual encounter in the bedroom, then that's when I see, Lyndsey, what you're talking about. And I really learned from those focus groups as well. And I can relate to it myself. We are not necessarily wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, oriented. We can be very, I want to say, there's an intensity, but I would agree also that it's not always in an intimate setting, it's not always the kind of intensity that we often associate with type 8s. And especially with sexual 8s, it's an it's an emotional intensity. It's a somatic intensity. It's a physical intensity. It can be a verbal intensity. Let's get deep. Let's go there. Let's not just do this. Let's talk about what we're doing. Let's hold each other's hand and walk through what we are doing. Now, again, though, what I've discovered, and again, it's true of myself as a sexual eight, is not necessarily using like pet language or play language or innuendo language, but let's get to it. Let's get deep. Let's get intense. Oh, I love that. Let's intensely connect. And that, I think, is a part, Lyndsey, of that soft intensity that you speak of, that it can, once we're alone with a partner, and people might think that like eights are all about having big sex orgies. That is not necessarily the case for myself or for the people that showed up for the panel groups either, because it would be really hard. I mean, not that we wouldn't show up for that, not that I haven't shown up for that, but really craving that deep intensity with a one-on-one partner. Sam, does your research align with that?
Yeah, for sure. And I should have said at the beginning, my partner is also an eight, so this is one of the types I have like a lot of experience with personally as well. For sure, sexual eights tend to surprise people. Actually, all eights, but sexual eights especially because we're expecting this like big performative intensity, and eights don't really do that. We see performative more from threes. So eights, you can see a lot of really genuine vulnerability if they're able to go there. We have a question for you about that. Mysti, someone wrote one in about vulnerability, but this kind of like intense exterior, soft interior thing that, a lot of people associate with eights that comes out in the bedroom. That's, like really pleasantly surprising sometimes to partners. Again, with our self-pres eights, we see a little more reticence compared to the other eights, not compared to the other types. That's important to point out. So self-pres eights are still really intense and big and, have the same kind of experience as you're describing, but compared to the other two subtypes of eight, they're a little bit more measured.
I would agree with that. Often when I'm working with clients who identify as eight or have a partner who identifies as eight, I will refer to the turtle, and not so much that I think if we were going to connect an animal to a type, you wouldn't typically think of the eight being the turtle. But I refer to it as having that hard exterior shell. But if you pick them up gently, you're going to see that soft underbelly. And that has really been my experience, both personally and with the clients that I work with, that if 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 folks who aren't a type 8 are trying to understand or identify with somebody who connects to that point, if they could see that as a reference potentially in connecting with that person or working with that person, I have found for that to be really helpful to remember that there is indeed a soft underbelly. And if you think about the turtle, that's really vulnerable. And I love this analogy. It's just worked really well in the counseling practice because also like the most vulnerable position that a turtle could ever be in is on its shell, right, with its under, and that's when you often see the demise of the turtle, is when they're flipped over on their shell and that soft underbelly is exposed and they're most vulnerable. And so sometimes in working in the counseling world, I'll say, you know, so try not to flip them on their shell. Like, it's okay to gently pick them up and discover the soft underbelly. But if you flip them on their shell and expose it in a way that is very unsafe, you're probably not going to get positive results. Lyndsey, have you experienced that with eights in the counseling setting as well?
Yes, 100%. It is that when that you have to gently open up the underbelly or gently open the heart, and if you go to a place where there's like wounding around the heart, there you don't want to know the results from an eight. What happens?
So this makes me want to start asking some questions a little bit out of the order we planned, just because there's like a little bit of a natural flow into two different questions we got for Mysti. One of them, I'm going to ask them both because they're aligned. One of them was from an eight themselves, and it said, as an eight, I'm, terrified of opening up and being rejected or dismissed. And like that difficulty level goes way up when I'm feeling tender about something with my partner. They're kind of seeking advice. And then a partner of an eight wrote like the flip of that is authentic vulnerability and intimacy, even realistic with my type eight spouse. So, like, since we're already talking about this, Mysti, I was wondering if you could kind of speak to those questions.
Sure. So one of the uh, authors that I often look to, I usually look to Jerome Wagner and Enneagram Spectrum, and that's my certification. But I also really like the Riso Hudson work and the addition that they have with level of health. Kind of looks like a ladder, if you will. And on the very top, within our personality or within our ego, would be most healthy, or kind of like ascension, that like, oh, kind of a moment. And then on the very bottom, and when I use this in the counseling world, it would be the least healthy, or so at the top is most resourceful, using healthy, effective coping skills. At the bottom of the ladder is least resourceful, leaning toward more unhealthy, ineffective coping skills. And at the very bottom, we might even see hospitalization if we're talking about a psychotherapy, kind of a model here. And so I think that as an eight, as a sexual eight, and this idea of vulnerability, I also always have to really remember that I'm a licensed psychotherapist. And so I'm in my mid 50s. I have had years and years and years of training around the value of vulnerability. Huge Brene Brown fan. I'm comfortable talking about. I wouldn't say that shame is necessarily an emotion that comes naturally to me, but I really like her work on vulnerability also. And so I always try to remember when I'm working with other eights who maybe just are not in my age bracket, so just don't have the number of years necessarily looking at this, or have the psychotherapy or psychological training that goes along with the value of vulnerability. But I think that's how I would respond to these questions about how, like, having a hard time opening up, having a hard time being vulnerable, and trust comes into this as well. So the more we can practice really surrounding ourselves with people that we find trustworthy, and practice with those people being as open and honest. We're always going to be like honest and direct, right? Like that's just sort of an eight thing. But I think that that's different than being open and honest and vulnerable and mature. Some of those the elements of healthy, stable communication can allow us to climb higher on that level, the ladder of levels of health. eights will be naturally higher on that ladder and more healthy the more they practice vulnerability and give people an opportunity to show up as being trustworthy. Lyndsey, how about you? Is that what you find in the office as well?
Yes, I would 100% agree with what you're saying.
And does that practice, Mysti, like then translate to being vulnerable in the bedroom? Since that's what we're sort of here to talk about. Can you practice those skills and just like your friendships, et cetera, and does that translate?
Yes, I think that you can actually start practicing that in the bedroom because if that's what you desire, if that's what you crave anyway, that's probably the first best place to practice that vulnerability is because we want it. And I really try hard not to be overarching in language. So I just caught myself saying, we want that as though every eight is the same or every sexual eight is the same. And that is not true. But the three of us are here together because we've all been, in this, in so many different ways about these topics. So absolutely start in the bedroom in that place that you already want that you're seeking that hopefully with a partner that you already have some amount of trust with and which will just naturally make you more confident and comfortable really showing that soft underbelly that vulnerability sexually and if you can practice that with a safe trusted partner you're more likely to be able to want to start doing that in other non-sexual relationships.
Perfect. Lyndsey, do you have another question for Mysti from followers?
Like, which one of these should I ask? Actually, one of the ones that I liked is it said that eights take control so naturally. It's so easy to let them lead. Is that what most eight prefers, especially in the bedroom?
Absolutely not. No, and so often we are really desiring a partner who is willing to see into that vulnerability and take a little control so that we don't always have to have that hard exterior shell showing. We want a partner who wants to explore the soft underbelly and who's will again, do we want a sexual partner to come into the bedroom and, be angry and demanding and hateful and abusive? No, nobody wants that. But do most eights that I have ever worked with, and this does include myself, want a sexual partner who is willing to take the lead sometimes? Absolutely. Now, we probably don't want somebody who would never want us to take the lead. We wouldn't want somebody who would reject us ever leading. So, two eights in the bedroom is always sort of an interesting sexual encounter to look at. But definitely, we want a partner who's not afraid to allow the bedroom, the switch, I like that. Yes, to allow the bedroom to be a place where we don't have to be in control because so often in the outer world, we feel like we have to be in control because nobody else is.
And it's so much of a relief for eights when they see that they can trust someone else to lead. With the caveat I'll add of like, you better lead well. You better not like come up at this being like, oh, wavering about leading. I'm not quite sure I want to lead this encounter. The eight's going to have to flip and take it over because they won't be able to trust your leadership. So you need to like really be grounded in yourself and 100% taking that space. Mysti, what about gender dynamics? Because we had a question about that with, our society kind of rewarding these sexual dynamics in men, but not in women. Can you speak about maybe your personal experience with that?
All day long. One of the greatest challenges of identifying at this point of the Enneagram is that I say it about myself. I've had other people say it about me. We hear it about other eights is they'll say, gosh, that's a more masculine personality. And what's interesting too, like I know all of us have had some worldwide experience. So we've spent some time in other countries together learning, about some of the differences. this is I think it can be a generalization, but it's especially a generalization in the U.S. in our in our U.S. Culture around the characteristics often associated with type 8 tend to be more U.S. masculine characteristics. And I love that. Jennifer said, just tell me what country to move to, Misty. Well, I think in Sweden we saw a shift in this. I think not if you both agree that that these U.S. characteristics didn't necessarily carry over in Sweden. And so I I would say that now I lost track of the question. Sam, will you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, just what's your personal experience with gender dynamics around sexuality, being maybe judged for being more sexually assertive as a woman versus we see men are, more revered for that.
Okay, yes. So then that's where I went to that like, that occurs in general with behaviors, but definitely in sexuality as well. That I've always been known, and before I ever met the Enneagram, I was known for being sexually direct with somebody that I was attracted to or, might have been interested in having a sexual encounter with. And that can be seen, like all of the other behaviors, sexual 8 women often get labeled as aggressive, whereas a man who uses those same techniques that I might have been using would have been labeled as possibly assertive, but definitely a more positive spin on whatever language people would choose to use. And then all the way to she's a slut, she's a whore, she's some of that stronger language that we can see as well with women who are naturally more sexually assertive and again, it's interesting because sexual 8 women get labeled aggressive. I would say that they are more sexually assertive for sure, especially in comparison to women of other types. But then again, it swings back to that conversation of what actually happens when we're behind closed doors. So we get labeled as aggressive, like when our clothes are on, but we're not always necessarily so aggressive when our clothes are off. And the reason I love conversations like this and the work that the two of you are doing with sexuality and the Enneagram is to help us understand how dangerous it is to put blanket labels on people and behavior and really like get into the juicy conversations of how that doesn't always show up the same in different environments in the public versus in the bedroom.
That was such a great answer, Misty. Thank you so much. Um, Lyndsey, do we have any fast question? Do we have time for one more?
One of the things that I thought, like one person had mentioned about desire for independence and whether someone was mad at you or not. And I think that, I could even answer this quick, and I'm sure Misty can answer this. You will know if an 8 is mad at you. There is no nuance. There is no passive aggressive. There is no, so like, it's if they are angry or frustrated with you, that will be clear and direct. If they want autonomy or want their own space, they're going to take that, but it's not going to be anything to do with you. And I'm assuming both of you would agree, but I think that some of the more passive types, like 9s or 2s, or maybe even some of the 5s and the 4s, might interpret things that are not there. And so I think it's just really good to, even 1s could do this, just to keep in mind, again, there is no nuance with an 8. You both agree?
I would love to answer that question. Absolutely. And the aggression that sometimes other types might feel, like you said, Lyndsey, is not usually personal per se, but it's about I feel comfortable expressing my anger, and what I'm desiring is to be able to express that to create an opportunity for us to work through it and get over it, get on with it. And I think that that can translate to the topic of sex and sexuality as well, in that we are also not afraid to ask for what we want in the bedroom. And we're not afraid to tell you what we like and also tell you what we don't like, hoping not that you will take it personally, but that it will allow for conversation, for you to stop doing that thing that I don't enjoy so that you can start doing the thing that I really do enjoy.
That's such a great note to end on because we're already at time. This went so fast, and it was so fun to have you on here, Mysti, and giving the people, all of your rich clinical experience and personal experience perspective on AIDS. We didn't answer quite every question, but we got to a lot of them, and we can answer more of them on our Instagram stories, etc. So send in more questions. We'll wrap Mysti in to help answer them. So if we didn't get to your question, just send us in some more questions, and we'd love to answer those. And next month is going to be sevens on the first Friday, back to the first Friday.
Thank you both. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you
That went so
guys.
quickly.
I know. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Nice to see you both.